For the last 7 or 8 years, the podcast comedy ecosystem ran on one unwritten rule. You don't mess with the mothership. Call it what it was. An industrial cartel dressed up as a friend group trading podcast guest spots. Comedians spent years treading lightly and tiptoeing around the gatekeepers just to keep their access intact. If you were coming up in LA or New York, your whole livelihood hinged on landing that 2-hour guest spot in Texas. You kept your head down, laughed at jokes that didn't land, and didn't dare question the hierarchy. That wall's been standing for years. In the last few weeks, it's come down. And the unspoken consensus holding this whole ecosystem together is unraveling faster than anything we've seen since the podcast boom started. This time, it's not legacy media, sponsors, or mainstream cancel culture applying the pressure. It's coming from 2 different directions at once. On one side, the old guard who got rich off this system, going hyper-defensive and paranoid, melting down on stream over minor chat comments.
That idiot was telling people to go to comedy shows and heckle the comics and tape it. And about 10 of them got beat up. One got beat up bad at the Comedy Store.
On the other, a brand new wave of touring comics in their 30s, looking at the whole Rogan sphere infrastructure and shrugging, I don't respect your stand-up, and I don't need your podcast.
And then, I don't know, I wouldn't talk to Theo Vaughn or I wouldn't talk to Joe Rogan. I don't need to. Paul, it's not necessarily even I wouldn't talk to them, but I mean, the truth is, I don't respect them. And especially if I don't respect their stand-up comedy, then I go, well, what do I even care? I certainly don't respect you as a piercing journalist.
Today, we're looking at how one Twitch broadcast getting cut off by moderation bots and one awkwardly tense podcast debate expose just how fragile modern comedy royalty really is. Let's start with the old guard. If you followed Joe Rogan's circle over the years, you know Joey Uncle Creepy Diaz is treated almost like a mythical figure, the guy Rogan routinely calls the funniest man alive.
But luckily I had Joey Diaz.
Joey's your guy.
West Coast Patrice.
Yeah.
He was very much like that. Joey Diaz was very much like that. We would all line up the back of the room when Joey Diaz was lighted on fire.
Yeah.
And all the people I've ever seen, I've never seen anybody hit Joey Diaz RPMs. He would have these bits that they were so funny that you couldn't, he could say things you weren't allowed to say.
Yeah.
Because he was like a human cartoon.
Mm-hmm.
You weren't even sure if he was real.
Yeah.
The master storyteller whose wild tales from the 80s and 90s made him a staple of podcast culture. For over a decade, he held an unassailable spot near the top of that hierarchy. And for just as long, he's carried a real amount of anxiety about internet commentary he can't control. Joey's whole persona was built on saying the unsayable, crazy stories about his past and his wild nights in the comedy scene, told with total unedited transparency. For years, audiences praised him for being raw and unfiltered. But that only works when you control the mic and the room. The moment independent commentary channels started pulling those same stories out of context and running them through a modern lens, the whole dynamic flipped. Last week, Joey was live on Twitch, playing video games for his core audience, a low-key stream, nothing unusual. Then a user in his chat typed 5 words, "Red Bar is watching, be warned." Wow. Just a passing reference to Mike David from Red Bar Radio, an independent commentator who hasn't posted a podcast episode in nearly a year. Joey abandoned his game mid-round, fixated on the chat, and launched into a rant so aggressive and slur-heavy that Twitch's moderation bots cut the stream offline mid-broadcast.
What?
Somebody in my chat said, Red Bar is watching, be warned, you are on a fool's notice. What the fuck does that mean?
He's a and so are the people that they're just a handful of they've been talking for years. The guy they're talking about is gone. He couldn't deal with the talent base. But they're all
Thanks, Mizzy. You tell him. I don't even know what that means anyways.
That's what they tell everybody. That idiot was telling people to go to comedy shows and heckle the comics and tape it. and about 10 of them got beat up. One got beat up bad at the Comedy Store.
Red Bar's watching. Be warned. I mean, even I've gotten those comments. Whether you want to be on his good side or bad side is completely up to your actions. But somehow that was enough to turn a comedy legend into a man having a full tactical meltdown on camera, with Twitch's own moderation bots getting dragged into the crossfire as collateral damage. The bots ended up showing more restraint than the guy they were supposed to be moderating, which is a sentence I did not expect to type today. You need the backstory here. This goes back years, not one comment. If you're wondering why a comedian with millions of followers and decades in the business gets this rattled by a passing mention of an internet commentator, this is why. Back around 2020, Red Bar started clipping old podcast episodes where Joey recounted stories from the late 90s and early 2000s. Stories he told himself, on air, about trading stage time at the Comedy Store for favors from open mic comics.
In the past, people go, Mike, why are you hating on Joey Diaz? He's fine. He's committed heinous Me Too's. We have audio of Joey Diaz himself going, when I was at the Comedy Store and Chelsea Handler was there, this is when she was just starting out.
The first time I met Chelsea Handler, I went off on her in a sexual way. You know, and I'm at the store.
Oh, you were geeked up.
And I'm geeked up, luring bitches with shit.
Yeah.
And I go to
she's there.
And I go to the comedy unit to do a spot, and I see Chelsea Handler looking finer than a motherfucker.
Really?
And she's crazy as it is, but I knew that I had done something wrong.
Those clips resurfaced right as the comedy world was going through its own reckoning, around the same stretch when comedians like Chris D'Elia and Brian Callen saw their careers collapse. It rattled Joey badly. The same stories he'd used for years to build his tough guy image had suddenly become liability material. And because Red Bar hosted the clips on his own site, he was completely exposed to a format he couldn't influence. So Joey didn't stay quiet. He posted a 15-minute video where he admitted to hiring a private investigator to track down where Mike lived and made thinly veiled threats about what would happen to him.
Because you got nothing to stand on. You're a heartless soul of a fucking man. And I'll tell you what, how it's going to go down. It's going to go down very simple. See, anybody who serves a dish correctly is going to give you time to breathe. They're going to let you settle down in Tucson and go back to Chicago and think the coast is clear. And when you least expect it one night, you're going to run out of that whiskey you drink and you're going to go to the liquor store. And there's going to be a guy there with a bat. And he's going to hit you across the head, maybe hit you across the legs, maybe hit you across the back. You're going to wake up with blood all over you and go to a hospital. And you know how bad you're going to feel in that hospital? After somebody hit you in the head with a bat and you got stitches.
That's not toughness. That's a guy terrified of being held accountable, a comedian who built his whole reputation on being unshakable, publicly boasting about private investigators and veiled threats over some Twitch chat comments. Fast forward to today. Red Bar hasn't put out a show in months, yet Joey's still on Twitch. And he's the one who got his broadcast cut off by Twitch's mod bots because he couldn't control his reaction to a name in a chat window. That's the paranoia of the old guard. They built their fame in a bubble, controlling the mic, controlling the room, insulated by the biggest podcast host on earth. Outside that bubble, internet commentary doesn't play by their rules, and the fear of losing that protection keeps them permanently on edge. To understand why meltdowns like Joey's are happening now, look at the structural shift underneath comedy careers. For over a decade, the old guard held total authority for one plain reason. Every up-and-coming comedian needed them. The pipeline was linear and tightly gated. Open mics, then New York or LA, years grinding to get past at the Comedy Store or the Cellar. And, if you played it right, an invite onto Joe Rogan's couch or a slot opening for one of his arena-level friends. That one appearance was life-changing, the ultimate fast track in the business. It could turn a comic paying rent with side gigs into someone selling out theaters in 48 hours. Because the bump was that powerful, it created an environment of mandatory compliance across the whole industry. If an older comic said something out of touch, you didn't correct him. If a host went on a strange rant about medicine, economics, or politics, you smiled and nodded because pushing back meant kissing your ticket sales goodbye. That wasn't cynicism. That was just how you stayed employed. But 2026 doesn't look like 2018. The Rogan bump still matters, but it's not the only path to an audience anymore. Short-form clips, self-produced specials, and direct-to-consumer platforms have decentralized how people discover new talent. Younger comedians aren't sitting around waiting for a legendary host to grant them an audience. They're building it themselves through their own editing rooms, clip channels, and touring circuits. They're becoming their own producers, editors, and marketing departments, skills the old guard never had to learn. Take away that financial dependency, and the illusion of invincibility goes with it. Once a comic's tour revenue doesn't hinge on keeping a podcast host happy, there's no reason left to stay quiet. The legendary host stops being someone you can't question and starts being just another guy whose work holds up or doesn't. Enter Gianmarco Soresi. Gianmarco Soresi is a 30-something New York comic who's built a serious following on sharp clips and relentless touring. Recently, he went on Jim Norton's podcast. Norton's a radio legend from the Opie and Anthony era, and for the last decade his default mode has been polite, diplomatic neutrality. His whole approach boils down to this: everybody's talented, comedy's subjective, nobody's allowed to say otherwise. It's the old guard's go-to move. Treat everything as harmless entertainment so you never have to take a side or alienate a powerful colleague in Austin. Gianmarco walked onto that set and broke that agreement.
Have you met? Did you talk to any of them?
Schultz and I once talked at the Cellar once, and it was fine. There was no resolution to it. And then, like, I don't know, I wouldn't talk to Theo Vaughn or I wouldn't talk to Joe Rogan. I don't need to.
Would you not talk to them just because of their politics, or have you heard things about them that you like? I don't like this guy.
No. It's not necessarily even when talk to them, but I mean, like, the truth is, like, I don't respect them, and especially if I don't respect their stand-up comedy, then I go, well, what do I even care? I certainly don't respect you as a piercing journalist. So if I don't even like your stand-up, then whatever.
Yeah,
you're not a peer.
Watch Jim Norton's face the second Gianmarco says it. He's calculating exactly how much silence he can get away with before it reads as agreement. 10 years of getting paid to nod along on other people's podcasts, and someone finally asks him to have an actual opinion about a friend's stand-up special. He visibly doesn't know how. Watching him grope for a neutral non-answer is like watching a guy try to remember a language he used to speak fluently before the industry beat it out of him. Gianmarco's real argument here is about the work itself. For years, the defense around Rogan's circle was that the show stood outside the establishment, a place challenging legacy media and speaking truth to power. But Gianmarco points to the obvious pivot. The show became the establishment they sought to rebel against. What started as an alternative outlet turned into a soft landing spot for tech billionaires, corporate elites, and political figures getting uncritical friendly interviews.
But the thing is, like, is it ruining their ability, or is it just shifting to a different paradigm? Because it's like they got Barry Weiss, who's, you know, practically owned by the Ellisons and whatever, and now Joe Rogan keeps having on people that are more sympathetic to that worldview. So it's not that they're necessarily fracturing a belief in a media system. It's creating like a kind of more skewed new version that everyone's listening to.
Well, Rogan did ask Kamala, and he offered her any time.
That's fine.
She turned it down.
That's fine, but he's having on like the Sam Altmans and the Mark Zuckerbergs and some billionaire people and the Elon Musks that I'm like, this is not shaking up the paradigm. This is bolstering the richest people there is.
Watch how Jim Norton handles this. He keeps retreating to the standard lines. They're just comedians, it's just a conversation, it's up to the listener to decide. At one point, he even defends a host giving medical advice by pointing out the guy's in good shape.
Like, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
I don't think that it's only...
You can like it as entertainment. I just think if you're going like for medical advice, those people who do...
Right.
That's crazy.
I wouldn't go to
me.
any podcaster for medical advice, but Bill Gates gives a lot of advice about health and COVID vaccine. And I'm not against COVID,
sure.
But I'm saying, like, is he more qualified to talk about it than Joe, who's in good shape? Like, you know, look at Bill Gates. He's just a fucking, you know what I mean? Like, who are we listening to?
Yeah, but we should have some qualifications.
This exchange captures the real generational divide in comedy right now. You've got an older comic playing defense, hedging so he doesn't burn bridges with his friends in Texas. And across from him, a younger comic looking at the actual work, the softball billionaire interviews, and saying what everyone's thinking. The specials aren't good. The political takes are uncritical. And I'm not pretending otherwise just to protect a networking opportunity. It boiled over when the conversation turned to Tony Hinchcliffe. Gianmarco asked Jim point blank whether he'd actually watched Tony's stand-up special. Jim sidestepped, pivoting instead to how fast Tony thinks on his feet, hosting Kill Tony.
You know, people give Hinchcliffe a hard time. I love him because he's been good to me. Like,
Sure.
you know what I mean?
But if you watch that special,
I haven't watched the special, but
I dare you.
But I've done, you know what?
I dare you.
I've done Kill Tony enough times where I watch his brain. He's as fast as anybody.
Jim, I can't. Jim,
I'm telling you, when you watch him on Kill Tony, he's lightning
Jim,
fast.
I watched the whole special. You watched the whole special.
No. I'm talking about Kill Tony. I didn't watch the special.
I know.
Okay.
I know.
That's the whole issue in miniature. The Old Guard blurs the line between hosting a viral show and actually writing tight stand-up. Younger headliners who grind out their own theater tours on the strength of their own writing aren't buying it anymore. If you're calling yourself a comedian first, the material has to hold up on its own, not just the platform behind it. Put these two moments side by side, and the picture gets pretty clear. On one end, you've got Joey Diaz losing it on Twitch over a single line of chat text, because the Old Guard can't stand criticism they can't suppress. On the other, you've got comics like Gianmarco Soresi showing that the next generation doesn't need to bow to the podcast cartel to build a real career. The Rogan Sphere's monopoly was never really about who made the best comedy. It ran on fear. Fear of being left out. Fear of losing access. Fear of your career stalling. Once one generation proves you can thrive without asking permission, that fear stops working, and so does the monopoly. What are we thinking? Is the old podcast empire finally losing its grip? Or is this just normal friction between generations? Drop your take in the comments, hit like, and subscribe for more of these breakdowns, and I'll see you in the next one.